All right. Good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Friday, November 14th. And let's start with Venezuela this time because I saw a headline saying that the U.S. is announcing Operation Southern Spear. So now it's like official. We're some military operation. I'm not exactly sure what that encompasses. Does that mean we are attacking Venezuela? Or are we just going to keep on blowing up boats in the Caribbean?
Yeah,
What's
it's
happening?
it's not clear. It isn't clear. It may be just a continuation of speedboat demolition. But I think no, I think it implies more than that. I think there will be some kind of a attack on land targets in Venezuela. We just don't know what. Um, yeah, there was some debate over whether or not Trump was going to go ahead with this. There were rumors that he was hesitating. Uh, I remember one report that the USS Gerald Ford, the aircraft carrier, had stopped right off the coast of Morocco. Well, now the USS Gerald Ford and its task force, they're in the Caribbean. They're in position for a potential attack on Venezuela. So we have, there's that fact, and then we have this official declaration. And I mean, it seems like there's clearly a momentum towards some sort of attack, and it would be very, very hard for Trump to walk away from this without doing anything, without losing a lot of face. So I think something will happen. Something, meaning some sort of attack on land targets within Venezuela.
I think the big question is just why. And I've never got a really satisfying answer for that. And I think the American people don't have a satisfying answer. We're told narco terrorism, but it's very easy for us to know that, hey, the problem isn't really Venezuela. If we're talking about drugs, it's
Yeah,
Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico, the cartels. Or if you're really talking about the drug problem, we need to address the demand problem here in the United
yeah,
States. That's a real problem. Venezuela does not seem to be the main reason. And then the other
yeah,
thing that's thrown around a lot is, well, they have the world's largest proven oil reserve. So is this all about just getting the oil? But we have heard from Maduro himself that, hey, actually, Venezuela is wanting to do business with the U.S.
right,
and say, come in and, help develop these fields and we can work something out. There's no reason
right,
to go to war. That's not the best way to extract resources. You should
right.
engage in trade. And then the other thing that we've talked about before is just simply trying to demonstrate strength, that we've been getting a lot of losses around the
Yeah.
world.
Hmm.
The Houthis have embarrassed us. Things aren't looking good in Ukraine. So maybe we just sort of demonstrate our strength here in our hemisphere and sort of to show other world powers that we're still top dog. But none of those reasons are that satisfying to me. What do you
Yeah.
think that's what it is?
I think it's the last one you mentioned, plus Marco Rubio's obsession with Venezuela and Cuba. I think it's those two things. Yeah, again, it doesn't make sense, in terms of the interests of this country to actually attack Venezuela, but it maybe does make sense in terms of Trump's personality. I mean, he does want to have a clear win. He's been disappointed. All these other problems that he's claimed to solve, or these wars that he's claimed to have won. Well, it's the more the time goes on, the less obvious that becomes, and clearly he's failed. In the case of Russia and China, he can't push them around. He's attempted it, and he's had to back down. Um, Now he does want to. I think he does want to have a clear victory. He wants to show that the U.S. is number one, and Venezuela seems like an easy target to him.
Is it an easy target?
Well, if it's easy enough to fire missiles into it, and maybe drop some bombs on it. I don't know how easy. We've heard reports. We know that there are S-300s. I don't know how many there are. Um, how well trained the operators are. These are all unknowns. I've also heard that maybe they have some anti-ship missiles. I don't know what the ranges of those are. So it may not be that easy, but I would hope that the U.S. military understands exactly what Venezuela can do and will act accordingly. Um, and if they proceed with, I don't know. There are different possibilities. There could be a decapitation strike attempted. take out Maduro and the leadership of the Venezuelan government. That could happen, or at least be attempted. They could go after military assets, just strike bases, strike air defense, maybe in preparation for a strike later. There's some talk about them seizing the oil fields. Now, that seems to be much more dangerous. Once you put people on the ground, things really could go wrong, especially in a country like Venezuela. So I think that he would be reluctant to do that. You just see from, Trump has shown a real reluctance of actually putting the so-called boots on the ground. And by and large, he has avoided that. He's carried out assassinations, like the assassination of Soleimani during his first term. He did he attacked the Ukrainian nuclear facilities, but that was, quick in and out. That's the kind of thing that he likes to do. So I think we'll see some version of that here. And, his hope is that he'll go in, he'll blow something up. He can, again, claim that he demolished something, obliterated something, and made America safer. And then, maybe just steam away. I would almost applaud him if he did that. It would be, it would be kind of puerile. It would be really shameful in so many ways, but it's a lot better than actually a lot better than a quagmire, which is what could happen if we actually invade. And we do, we have that option. There are some Marine ships there with, I've heard 4,000, 5,000 personnel aboard that are there for, they're amphibious ships and they could carry out a landing. Again, I think that could be very, very, it would be a grave error and could, again, lead to a quagmire.
I just find it very strange that we would be doing this when the only reason you're saying is it's a personal favorite for Marco Rubio and to make us look stronger. And from what it sounds like, there's no guarantee that will be true. It might make us look weaker if it doesn't go the way we want it to go. Yeah, so
right.
Just the political calculus doesn't make sense to me. I just don't think that this would be a popular move in America.
I don't think so. No, I really don't think so. Again, well, you have to remember, like prior to Iran, the polls showed that there really wasn't support for it, or the support was very, very soft. But then when it apparently anyway succeeded, then the support for it, the approval of his action actually soared, at least, on the Republican side of the spectrum, and especially within the MAGA base. A lot of people say how, the MAGA base was opposed to this. Well, yeah, again, they're opposed to these quagmires, these long wars. But but a lot of the MAGA base, not let's say the more intellectual and principled part of the MAGA base, but a lot of the MAGA base, just likes to see things blown up by America, as long as that's it, and it's over. So he may just be, if you look at the polls, there really isn't support for it. But if he's able to pull something off that spectacular, it looks spectacular on film. You see the big booms, and then he declares his obliteration victory. Yet another thing has been obliterated. But maybe it'll work for a little while anyway. I don't think he would get much of a boost from it, to be honest. So,
and also I feel like when you're talking about the Iran bombing of these nuclear plants, I feel like part of it was that just some Americans just like to see our bombers and blow things up, and they get this hoorah feeling. But I think the other reason that maybe got a boost was because Trump declared, that's it, it's over, it's done. He made that very definitive. It was a scary moment between Iran and Israel. Doesn't matter what side you're on. It was looking like the U.S. is going to get drawn into this. It's going to have to, because Israel's getting pounded. What's going to happen? And then Trump did this and just declared that it's done. So I think his boost might be more from the fact that people are like, oh God, okay, crisis averted. Here, I don't think you'll have that. You might say, you just started a crisis. There wasn't a crisis here to begin with. There weren't missiles flying. Right. You didn't have to intervene. And now all of a sudden we're like, oh great, now what? Our ships are under attack. Some of our soldiers are dying. What's going on? Like this also, no Americans died. So I think it's a completely different can of worms that we're opening.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, it is going to be, well, again, it was Israel that attacked Iran first. And
Right.
so in a way, it was to say, yeah, we can breathe a sigh of relief. You know, it was shortly thereafter the ceasefire was declared, and it was apparently over, at least for the time being. Um, yeah, there was a building crisis, but this was something that it was mainly generated by Israel. And, of course we played our role, but it was mainly generated by Israel. And then we came in there and, right, actually kind of brought an end to it. So that is a very good point. That's part of it. It may be that, yeah, we'll see. It may be that he's miscalculated at this point. Even if he pulls something off, that looks kind of good, it's just not going to be very convincing. It's like, there'll be people that just believe Trump no matter what he does, but he's been damaged for, reasons of which we're all well aware right now. And I don't think this is going to help him in any significant way. He might get if things go very well, he might get a temporary boost, but then it's going to be harder to pull himself out of it. And again, there wasn't really, he kind of created the whole thing in the first place. So it's just a little bit more difficult, like you say, to go around and saying, I solved this problem. You created the problem.
Well, first of all, what's the problem? The problem they're saying is this fentanyl crisis, the drug overdoses in America. You tag Venezuela, it doesn't do anything because we know the fentanyl is not coming from Venezuela. Right. Venezuela is not the issue here when it comes to drugs. And so it's just like, what did you solve? There's nothing. I just don't. It's such an insane thing. Like if you even bring it up with, I remember mentioning to a buddy of mine a month or two ago, I was like, man, we might be going to war with Venezuela. He's like, what? Like, it's not even registering. Like, why? Where? It's not even there. And it just, and I'm just surprised that there doesn't even seem to be much of an attempt to try to generate a good reason. It's just like,
narco-terrorists. Narco-terrorists, right? I don't think it's going to work. Well, one thing is the fentanyl crisis is not going to go away because of this.
Right.
And maybe there will be people that, believe that he really did something. Of course, there are people that just believe what he's doing, that these speedboats were actually carrying fentanyl to the U.S., some nonsense like that. But people will be bound to notice, after this is all over, I don't know when that will be, but when it's all over, and the dust clears, they'll notice that there's still people dying of fentanyl in this country at the same rates, if not higher rates.
Right. Do you think that another possible reason that this might be happening is it's just a distraction from everything else that's happening? The MAGA civil war, the Israel first versus America first, and also the Epstein files. I mean, yesterday, this huge Epstein leak came out, and then 4 hours, Operation Southern Spear. I don't know. Maybe this is me just being a conspiracy theorist, but it's just like...
I wouldn't call that a conspiracy theory, because this is a tried and true method for, politicians who find themselves, presidents in particular, who find themselves in a fix. Again, there was a lot of suspicion about some of Clinton's actions during his presidency, when he was in trouble over the Monica Lewinsky affair. There was this attack on Sudan, and there was another one. I can't remember what it was exactly. But many people at the time said, this really looks like an effort at distraction. And again, it's just well known, it's just that temptation always exists there for a president, to become involved or to launch some kind of foreign adventure, whenever he has troubles at home.
It's just so sick when you think about, America always says we're the greatest country in the world. And then it starts to look like, hey, this is a country run by corrupt, blackmailed pedophiles that are willing to go to war with anybody than to actually, be shown that they are blackmailed pedophiles. That's kind of what it looks like.
Yeah, right. I don't know.
That's so evil.
Yeah,
it's so
I know.
Evil.
I'll say I don't know if that's actually true.
It's true.
But it may be. Again, I don't know. But there's reasons to suspect it, and that's what people are saying. And the fact is, our government deserves it because of so much of what it's done. We just had the president of Colombia go out and say that outright.
Right.
And I think that probably resonates with a lot of people around the world and in this country too.
Right. I mean, if there are these accusations being leveled at top people in the government, including the president, then what we should be have is transparency. The fact that they're doing so much to cover it up and not let us talk about it, just hush hush, distraction, that's just an admission of guilt, in my opinion. Like, why are we going through such lengths to protect Jeffrey Epstein? And I mean, he's dead, but I mean, the files, all the client lists, all these people. Why?
Right.
There's no explanation, right? What explanation can you provide?
Well, there is an explanation, of course.
The one I said.
Yeah, is that actually, Trump is in the files. That's the thing. It was
Trump
always going to,
and his friends and powerful
a lot of people,
everybody
on both sides of the aisle. There's no question about it. But for Trump, the most important thing is himself. Obviously, and it doesn't mean that he actually did anything illegal. I think in the end, that's just Trump. We know that he likes to hang around with young bikini-clad women or whatever. And maybe a little bit more than that, but maybe nothing illegal, again, immoral. We don't know. Maybe there was something illegal. I don't know. But he just thought, this makes me look bad because, again, Epstein is so toxic and that it's clear that he had a close relationship with him, a friendship, and he knew a lot of the stuff that was going on. And that does reflect very badly on him. It's at least that, because we can see that from the emails that have been leaked so far. And I think even if it's nothing more than that, you can understand why he wanted to keep it out of view. But I think that was a mistake. If it was nothing more than that, he should have just said, okay, yeah, I made some errors of judgment, but, I made this promise and here it is. This is all it is.
If we get the full release and the admission, I mean, I already feel like it's pretty damning what's out there already. But if it's just clear that we are ruled by blackmailed pedophiles, what's the protocol here? What do we do?
Well, I mean, it should be we throw the bums out. That's supposed to be the solution in a democratic country, but it just seems almost impossible to do that.
Yeah, it's just another blackmailed pedophile that comes into power. It's just like, what the hell is going on here? It's so crazy.
Yeah.
What's going on? What do we do? What do we do?
Yeah. Well, no, there's a great deal of corruption. I mean, there are very, very few people that are, let's say, not on basically the payroll of AIPAC. That's one thing you have to say is connected with all this. But you just have to look for those people that aren't on the payroll, that maybe are displaying some real independence.
So we hope that people like Thomas Massey, get more. I mean, just the fact that you see Miriam Adelson spending $20 million to unseat Thomas Massey just shows you the amount of foreign influence here. It's just out in the open. It's just so crazy that there's somebody that's truly America first, and it's the one person that Trump is trying to get rid of that actually resonates with his base is someone like Thomas Massey.
Yeah,
and
on behalf of Miriam Adelson, right?
On behalf of an Israeli citizen that is, of course, she's
also
an American citizen too. I know.
Yeah, but she herself, I mean, there was that scene in the Knesset, that we should recall, where he actually addresses her and basically says, like, yeah, you and your husband were calling the shots and you just came in, you treated the White House like your own home. And you told me to actually approve the annexation of the Golan Heights. And, I hadn't thought about that, but I did it, and then, I remember asking you, like, what comes first for you? Is it Israel or the U.S.? And he didn't answer, but I think we all know. And the unspoken answer was Israel. Right.
Well, I mean, her husband, late husband, Sheldon Adelson, right? Wasn't he known for just saying he was a one-issue guy, and that issue is Israel? So, I mean, we know where Adelson's loyalties lie. It's not hidden. Anybody that just like, how dare you? She's an American citizen as well. Like, we know what she's all about. It's not hidden. Everybody knows. She's born in Tel Aviv, or actually, I guess it wasn't even Tel Aviv back then. It was before. I think she was born in like 1943 or something. I forget. But anyways, she's an Israeli citizen. She's clear that she's Israel first, and here she is, so involved in U.S. politics, and clearly the only common denominator with all the money that she spends on our politicians is about Israel. It's just that's what it is. So. And it's just the fact that Trump is trying to get, is working with this person and doing everything he can to get rid of anybody that is an enemy of Miriam Adelson. It seems like it's just.
Yeah.
It's not a
Yeah,
good
no,
look.
no,
It's
it's really, no, it isn't. I think, yeah, this actually just reminds me of something. I don't know if many of our viewers watched the Duran interview of Robert Barnes, but I found that very, very interesting. And for one reason is that Robert Barnes, like among the people that would appear on the show, is probably the most pro-Israel prior to this most recent interview. That he was, one of the least reluctant to condemn Israel. That just wasn't part of his outlook. He wasn't anti-Israel. That was the sense that I got in hearing him in a lot of interviews. But this time he was really angry. It was clear. And it was just over these kind of issues. We're talking about Thomas Massey and the $20 million. It's just that he saw that, he was also um, very much on Trump's side. He was really a MAGA guy, much more, very, very intelligent guy, silver tongue, incredible guy. But he really did place a lot of hopes on Trump. And then he saw from almost day one, and he talks about it in there. It's just like, okay, first Netanyahu comes, and it's just one after another. And they're basically telling Trump, who you need to appoint to this position or that position. And, all these America firsters are pushed to the side. And so many in the end, you get so many of Israel's people. And that enraged him. It's just like, forget this. This is not MAGA. This is not what I signed up for. And what's happening to Thomas Massey is just another example of that. You say, well, wait a second,
Right. Yeah, no, it's when Trump won, got the presidency, I think he was +3 amongst the under 40s or under 35, something like this, the youth vote. He was up. And now he is -40. It just shows. It's over, but he seems to be oblivious to it. It seems like he doesn't care. He is kind of adopting almost like a dictator type mentality, just like I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. I don't care about the people at all. It's his last term. These tariffs are unconstitutional as well. We're doing these wars. He's not even trying to pretend to be America first anymore. It's just he's completely controlled.
Yeah, well, that's the part. And again, he has himself to blame. It's the kind of people that he's appointed, that he's, surrounded himself with. And there's just very few. Initially, like actually during his campaign, he did have, you could say, true America firsters within his inner circle talking to him. And but now, I think it's just that we see the same thing. It was a victory for the swamp, and he's surrounded himself with these other people. And so they're not giving him that option. They're just telling, well, you need to, in the case of Ukraine, you need to escalate and, put pressure on the Russians or whatever. It's just always it's the neocons are back there whispering into his ear and telling him, convincing him that this is your way out. And it isn't. It's not. They're, again, the world has changed. And the country has changed too.
Right. Well, what do you think is going to happen to Trump? Do you think there's a chance that he will get impeached? And would he be impeached over the tariffs? I mean, it doesn't seem like anybody gets impeached over wars. Like they can do that.
Unfortunately, right.
And if he does, is that a good thing? I mean, will anything change? That's the problem. It's just like, I don't think it matters. Nothing changes. So it's just.
Yeah, it's kind of like Ukraine. You say get rid of Zelensky, and who are you going to get? It's going to be somebody who's doing the same thing. Yeah, unfortunately, like just again, in the establishment, that's they're all on the same page, and that's the problem. Is that Trump has actually just been, in the end, he has been. You say domesticated by the establishment. He came in with with these wild and crazy ideas and seemed to actually start to act on them, but he just eventually they got their claws into him, and or rope wrapped around him, and now he's been completely subdued. Yeah, well. I really don't see anybody. It's going to have to be something that comes in from the outside. If it goes through the democratic process, maybe we'll see some sort of significant shift during the midterm elections. We'll see what kind of, actually these most recent elections, there's a lot of this talk about Zohran Mamdani. And of course, he was very, very openly pro-Palestinian, and that's a real first. That's a real, I think, a significant event in New York City, the city that has, a larger Jewish population than I think any other city in the world, maybe just with the exception of Tel Aviv. That's Yet he won, and he won convincingly, and he didn't back down. They tried to keep on throwing the anti-Semite label at him and anti-Israel. It didn't work. That's significant. But some of these other Democrats that won were just like clones of Hillary Clinton, if not worse. They were deep state people, like former CIA operatives, and I guess one was naval intelligence. And they are, more of the same. So who knows? We'll have to see. This was too small a sample to find if there's been any significant shift. But again, the other side has money. It has power. We'll see if Thomas Massie survives, and I sure hope he does. I'm kind of hopeful that he will. I mean, just putting in $20 million into this, this rural district it's got to be so obvious to people. And I just hope that they show some common sense and some loyalty to their guy. But we'll see. A year from now, I think we'll have a clearer picture if there's some hope within the democratic process here.
Okay. Yeah, I think money isn't going to help them here. I think it almost hurts them because people know where it's coming from and they understand what's happening now. I hope that's true. I really will. We'll see.
I hope so too.
But okay, so with these Epstein files, what's going on here? Do you know?
Well,
have you been following?
I don't. Yeah, well, it was first I know that the Democrats leaked a few, that were, maybe you couldn't call them quite smoking guns, but were very strongly suggested an unsavory, let's say, relationship or between Trump and Epstein. And yeah, it clearly hurt him. The Republicans responded by just releasing a huge trove of these files. I think maybe just to kind of like, it's like a squid squirting ink or something, just to kind of create a lot of confusion in the wake of those three, let's say, targeted leaks. And we'll see. We'll see what's in there. I some stuff has come up that's kind of interesting. Again, I wouldn't say anything is a complete smoking gun. A lot of it is highly suggestive, and I say, probably shows some, very, very bad behavior on the part of Trump. But it's not the sort of thing that would get him convicted in a court of law. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. Let's just put it that way. But in the court of public opinion, you don't have to, the standard isn't that stringent. It does, I think, condemn him in the court of public opinion, and it's going to hurt him. It's going to hurt him badly.
Isn't Thomas Massie forcing some type of vote? And what's the significance of this? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, it's Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's to release all of the documents. That's the idea, and it looks like that's going to happen because I think there was one representative that was, for whatever reason, technical reason, wasn't able to assume her position, but now can and is willing to sign on to that, and then it will probably go forward.
Okay, so do we know when that is?
I don't know.
It's in a month or so. Okay, well, whenever we'll see what happens. But then if this is coming out and there's something really damning, do you think that we'll see some crazy, even more crazy stuff coming out from the Trump administration as a distraction?
Yeah. Trump is not the kind of person to, he's like, he's not going to, well, no politician, they all go, they go down fighting. Well, some of them decide to make a big apology. That's true. To say like, some sort of confession and then try to just wipe the slate clean and start over. But Trump does not seem to be that kind of person to me. I think I don't recall him ever doing that, right? He always seems to go on the offensive when he's attacked. And he never admits his own errors, and instead he lashes out. And so, yeah.
Well, especially in an error, which is pedophilia, like that's not.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if it's pedophilia. Let's be careful about how we throw it.
All right, okay.
But no matter what, it is. Let's
protecting
say,
pedophiles, at least. That's what he's doing. We can say that.
You can
right?
say that. Yeah, I think that's fair.
Right. Yeah, I don't want to just straight up say, like we say, we don't know. But it's just disgusting to me, and it's so upsetting to everybody that this is happening, that we are protecting pedophiles,
right?
And that there's
it has hurt him because, again, it was part of what he was elected on. He was saying,
Right. It was
yeah,
part
we're
of his
going to release
campaign.
the files. We're going to release the files. And that's what, his attorney general and,
Dan Bongino, Cash Patel. I mean,
yeah,
they were
Kash
all
Patel but also, Pam Bondi, they all were saying that. And they said that, during the campaign and during like at least the first month or two of his present term. And then there
right.
was this sudden reversal. And, then he said, this was always a Democratic hoax. And again, there are people, they're the true believers, the dead enders, who are going to believe whatever he says, but they're a minority. Even I think most of the MAGA base is really disturbed by that. It has clearly hurt him.
Right. Right. And then Trump just says, I when asked about the Epstein, are you still talking about this guy? Like, come on. What are you talking? What's going on?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he has that bravado. He has a way of just kind of bluffing his way out of all kinds of difficult situations. It's not working this time.
Right. Okay. I'm going to stick on just domestic politics a little bit longer.
Okay.
I want to talk a little bit about Jolani, just talking about another huge scandal it's just kind of just flown under the radar for most people because, like we said, there's just so many crazy things going on right now that I don't think people have really understood what happened when we have this picture of Jolani in the White House with Trump and Trump saying, he's a good guy, had maybe a rough past or whatever, but he's good now. And we're talking about the former head of Al Qaeda and ISIS. Now, we were told
in Syria, right?
Okay, Al Qaeda,
the Syrian branch of those.
Okay,
yeah,
so
those organizations.
Former,
that's completely true.
Yeah, former Al Qaeda, a known head chopper. A Salafist is what you would describe him as, is right?
He certainly was, or is. I mean, that's not was, he is.
Right. So we were talking about an extremist, jihadist, head chopper.
Right.
These are the people that we were told brought down the two towers, the twin towers,
right.
In New York, killed over 3,000 Americans, the biggest attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor, and as a result of it, we went to war in the Middle East for 20 years, basically my whole life. That was my whole life. And then what did we get at the end of it? Thousands of our people die, millions of Arabs in the Middle East killed. Yeah. Millions of people displaced. And what did we get? We ended up, replacing the Taliban with the Taliban in Afghanistan. And then now here in Syria, we end up putting the head of Al Qaeda as charge of Syria, which he immediately started massacring Christians and Alawites and Shias. What an insult. Is this a humiliation ritual? Like, this was supposed to be our enemy, and now we're inviting him to the White House, and we take pictures and say how he's a great guy, and now he's in charge of this whole country and allied with Israel. Right. Like, it just doesn't. I just I'm just thinking, if you were an American soldier, your dad fought in these wars or whatever, and now you're wanting to join the military, aren't you thinking like, what is going on here? How is this possible? General Petraeus saying, "I'm a huge fan of yours. Did you get enough sleep, Jolani?" What is going? How is this? How is this allowed? I mean, is there not any self-awareness of what they just did?
They don't care. In the end, it's all about geopolitics for them. And in this case, it's really it's support for Israel. It's part of the effort to weaken Iran and also to weaken Russia. And all these things actually come first. It's these people like, these questions, the head choppers or whatever. It's like, okay, he may be a head chopper, but he's our head chopper, and that's what they kind of saw at the end. Again, this didn't start with Trump, of course. This, it goes all the way back to, I think, 2011. There was an email from Jake Sullivan to Hillary Clinton, who was Secretary of State at the time, and it says that we're on Al Qaeda's side in Syria. This was something that was leaked by WikiLeaks, so they knew it, but they just made the decision that we can use these people. Again, they don't see, they're not troubled by these moral questions or anything. It's just like, we can use these people because we want to overthrow Assad. And overthrowing Assad is on behalf of Israel. That's part of it. Zionism. It weakens Iran. It also weakens Russia, because not too long after that, Russia came in to support the Assad's government and to fight these people, Al Qaeda and ISIS. So again, it's an old story, and unfortunately, but it has become so blatant, and it ought to be very disturbing to everybody. That bounty, that $10 million bounty, was on his head until just a very few months ago, right?
Right. I mean, just the 9/11 terrorist attack was such a pivotal moment in American history and
Right.
in world history. It just changed
Right.
the course of everything. And so we all got geared up and we were angry and we want to go, and we said Al Qaeda was the bad guy. That's what we were told, that these were
Right.
the people, that they hate us because of our freedoms and our women wear bikinis or something that didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But at the time, nobody
Right.
was thinking.
Yeah.
And now Al Qaeda is the head of Syria and
Yeah.
is in New York and is in the White House.
Right. Well,
Like
it
that
never made
just
sense. Yeah, I know, but that's in a way, it's just inevitable, because this is, if you go back to the very beginning, the attack, for example, on Iraq and Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was the enemy of Al Qaeda. He was one of the main. So, the Al Qaeda rejoiced when he was overthrown. And in fact, they moved in and achieved a great deal of influence in Iraq where they didn't have any before. And then we had the birth of ISIS, within Iraq, too. It just never made sense, because what we had, it wasn't, the response to the attacks wasn't really directed at Al Qaeda. It was all about settling these geopolitical scores that we always had. These targets had been placed on Saddam Hussein, on Iran, and on Assad.
What
And
do you
we
say,
wanted
these
to,
geopolitical scores? Were they our geopolitical scores, or were they Israel's geopolitical
well,
scores?
right. I mean, to a great extent, they were just Israel's. It does show, and again, like Mearsheimer and Waltz talk about this in the Israel lobbyist, people like Wolfowitz, who were and Richard Pearl. They were really Israel firsters, and they saw this as a chance to take out Israel's main rival. Again, looking at it from our perspective, it really didn't make sense. We could actually, Iran immediately after 9/11, it actually made offers of reconciliation of peace to us, and as did the Russians. The Russians, Putin called and says, we're at your service, we'll help you out in whatever way, and they did actually. They did facilitate the attacks in Afghanistan, which made some kind of sense. There were problems with that too, but that's where Al Qaeda was based. But they had nothing to do with Iraq. And so, it's like, why go after eventually? It didn't happen right away, but eventually went after Iran. There was really no point to it. Iran has shown a willingness actually to bury the hatchet and wants to cooperate with us, but we don't want to, because again, it's Israel that just wants them gone. Israel doesn't want to have any kind of a rival, even a potential rival in the Middle East. And I think that you can make the argument that so much of this does have to do with Israel.
Doesn't this just make people question the whole story of 9/11? I mean, it was always a little bit fishy, but then we just kind of forgot about it. But now that you brought Al Qaeda back and now he's the good guy, don't you think that makes people question the narrative? It's making me question it very
Right,
heavily.
right.
I'm wondering, whoa, was Al Qaeda? Were we always working with this? Was
Yeah,
this
I
involved?
don't see any evidence that. Well, okay, there
is some evidence.
Okay, some, but I'm not exactly working with Al Qaeda, but that we were trying to. I think the argument is that we were trying to get a mole. I find to get our, maybe say, achieve some sort of influence over Al Qaeda, or at least to get a mole planted there in Al Qaeda, but. No, I don't think it's right to say that we were actually working with Al Qaeda ahead of time. They really were our enemy. But, it's just like enemies are clearly this was a kind of from the perspective of the people that run this country, it's those 3,000 deaths. Okay, that was one thing. That's a problem. We got to drop some bombs and show that we've retaliated. But hey, never forget about the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is Iran and these governments that are are seen as rivals or enemies of Israel and Russia and China. Those are that's all what really matters. So after we've chased Al Qaeda out of Afghanistan, for example, and killed some of their operatives. Well, yeah, now we can go back to playing the old game that we're always playing, and if we can use Al Qaeda, we'll use them. I think that's exactly how they that's how they thought, and that's how they operated.
I just, I feel like Al Qaeda, maybe there's always, like you said, an organic seed, and then it gets watered and created. And I think that, we know what the Mossad does. We know what our CIA does. It would not surprise me in the least bit if they found these Salafist groups and they just felt like we can use them. They're on our side, pump money in, do whatever, and now we can. It makes sense. It just helps.
Yeah, it does happen.
The whole demonization of Islam and Muslim people, just Arabs. We can just use these extremists, and now they're in charge of a country that borders Israel. What I mean? It's just like,
yeah. Right.
Okay.
No, yeah. Well, there's no question, that we have worked with them. And again, we have that email from Jake Sullivan saying that, hey, we're on their side.
Yeah, I just think
and
it goes back
that,
longer.
It
goes back.
Okay. Well, and we worked with the Mujahideen against the Soviet Union, and that clearly does happen. I think you just want to make a mistake. I think sometimes we start to think that, we see the CIA and we see that Mossad everywhere, and well, there's some reasons for doing that, but there is a whole world out there, and there are a lot of, other groups that do have their own, there are local issues, and other countries have agency. Again, with Syria, it's not just about Mossad and the CIA. They obviously played a role in the downfall of Assad. There's also Turkey that always has its own ambitions. And, in the case of of Al-Qaeda, you have to look at Saudi Arabia and Wahhabism and whatever. That is, I think you can find connections, but it is also, it has to be understood on its own terms. We can't just completely kind of assume that we're a great puppet master controlling all these things. But we do work with these. Sometimes these groups rise, and they can be, and they can kill our own people, but then we can see, we realize, hey, this is, we can actually use this group now,
I'm just saying that these groups rise because we water them. We make them rise. We see it everywhere. Whenever there are these, like you said, these local issues, some opposition groups, whatever, we see that as opportunity. And then we start putting money in there. We start putting resources into it. We start doing media coverage, whatever it is. And we see it everywhere. I mean, we're just talking about Venezuela at the beginning of this. Maria Cachado, she gets the Nobel Peace Prize, immediately starts saying, well, we need to have a military intervention in my own country. And then I just saw a video of her yesterday saying, America, you got to do this. There's $1.7 trillion worth of oil right here. You just come here and just take it, just like, it's just insane. It's like, okay, this is not organic. And I don't believe that any of this has been organic anywhere in the world, So it's just like, where would Al-Qaeda exist in any shape or form now if Israel and the U.S. weren't involved in any way? I don't think so. Yeah.
I think it would have.
I mean, but as a smaller, and that probably would have just petered out, died out. The only reason that these things we saw it talked about in Ukraine, with the ultranationalists and the far right sector or whatever, and this,
right. Yeah, clearly there's been influence and there's been alliance. You look at the roots of Al-Qaeda, and you have to go back to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. And there clearly was very direct U.S. support for the Mujahideen against the Soviet Union. And again, they built them up, and then Al-Qaeda really came out of that. I don't think that was intentional. And then Al-Qaeda ended up carrying out some very successful, even terrorist attacks against the U.S., even prior to 9/11, and then of course that was a big one. I don't buy the argument that that's actually that was a false flag or anything, and we were working with Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda has agency; they had their independence, but again, we're just very, very cynical. And clearly, afterwards, in spite of all the things that we heard from our government and the beliefs that the American people had that this was our number one enemy, our government did not look at the world that way. That's not the number one enemy. The number one enemy is Iran and Iraq, even though these are actually enemies of Al-Qaeda. So they ended up playing, where we said, okay, yeah, we're going after Al-Qaeda. We actually went after their enemies, not really in order to help Al-Qaeda. I wouldn't make that argument. But because we have our own priorities that are not the priorities that we actually explain to our own people. It's not what those, all those young men that signed up to go off to to Iraq or whatever, they thought they were actually fighting Al Qaeda. And in fact, they were actually doing the reverse. They actually created opportunities for Al Qaeda there. Again, because our government had its own objectives, and they're not the ones that that they stated. They was not what they had told their people. It's not what motivated all those people that actually went off, and many of whom, 4,000 of whom sacrificed their lives for.
I hope more and more people in our military are hearing these stories about, and understand, because if we go into another war, it's like, who are we fighting? What are we doing? What's the point of being here? Like with Venezuela, if we go to Iran, it's just, I hope they're asking these hard questions on like, well, what is the point of this? Is this actually in America's interest in any way? Who are we fighting for here, and what are we fighting? It just,
yeah.
It just doesn't.
Yeah, I
make
think
any
there's
sense.
no question that people have become, say, more cynical, or really just more realistic, and they do. They're not likely to respond to a call the way that they did back in 2003. So much has happened since then. A lot of people came back from that war with their eyes opened. Again, I know some of them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what else do you want to talk about, Dad? What else have you been thinking about? Should we go to Ukraine?
Yeah, we
MAGA
should go to
Civil
Ukraine.
War? Okay, Ukraine.
Yeah. Maybe we could talk very briefly about this corruption scandal, which is kind of interesting.
Oh, right.
It's the two main anti-corruption agencies in the Ukrainian government. The initialisms are NABU and SAPO. Now, you could look at it in a very naive kind of way and say that this is just about corruption. That these people are simply anti-corruption warriors and are fighting for a clean government. And I don't want to be completely cynical and say that's not a factor here. But I think it's well understood in Ukraine that a lot more is going on. It's part of a larger battle, and it's been true, I think, for a long time that these agencies they're part of a kind of a faction within Ukraine. They're first of all, they're very closely tied to Western governments. So the Western governments have used them in the past and are probably using them now as instruments, in achieving their own influence over Ukraine. For example, they became really bitterly disappointed with the Western governments did with Poroshenko at the end of his term, and so they went after him. Actually, these agencies did. With Westerns, again, they're very closely tied to Western, European governments. And they fingered a lot of his very close associates, and it helped to, ensure his resounding defeat in the election against Zelensky. But then later, none of these people were actually ended up in jail, which is typically what happens. Now, this time, they're going after some very close associates of Zelensky, including this guy, Mindich, who, was a co-owner with Zelensky of the comedy studio that made Zelensky famous, and was the guy that actually introduced Zelensky to Kolomoisky, the oligarch that brought about his election. Gave him the first financed that show. That made him famous. What was it? Defender of the People.
Where he played the president?
Yeah, he played the president. Yeah, right. Because it's actually the name of his party. I'm very embarrassed that I can't remember it exactly at this point. But anyway, he financed that show and then financed actually his run for the presidency. They're all very close. Then later, actually, they turned on Kolomoisky, and he is now in jail. Now, the news is that Kolomoisky though he is in prison, was part of this general attack on Zelensky and Zelensky's close associates, and especially this guy, who was the co-owner of the comedy studio and that introduced Zelensky and Kolomoisky. So this guy is fled. I'm thinking, is it Mindich? I think it is. Let me just see here. Yeah, it is Mindich. He's fled to Israel, by the way.
Oh,
That's
really?
where, yeah, that's where he's hanging out right now. When I guess he's Jewish, which is part of it, and then also there's the fact that Israel will not extradite people. Again, especially Jews that flee to Israel. That's long been their policy. So he's there, he's safe and sound, and it's clear that he had been notified by some people within the government. He cleared out just before they were ready to arrest him. But so they're going after these people that are very, very close to Zelensky. And, clearly, there's just, you can say within Ukraine, there's this broader alliance, that Poroshenko, the former president, is a part of and to a great extent leads. And, they all, Kolomoisky used to be actually enemy of Poroshenko, but now they're both enemies of Zelensky because Zelensky, turned on both of them. And they want to see him weakened, and ideally, they would like to see him gone. The Western governments, for various reasons too, are feel like he's kind of out of control and would like to regain control over him. So the thinking within Ukraine is that they're not going to actually take Zelensky down, but they're going to defang him. They're going to again, knock out some of his closest associates, and they're going to try, they may not succeed, but they're going to try to put in new people that are going to be more in line with these other factions and who maybe can exert some control over Zelensky. That's the way. Yeah.
So who's going to be in control then? If they defang him, are we just going to say that it's the United States has put their people in charge now again, and they're now more in control? Or
well, they say it's more, it's not like the U.S. and Europe are at odds, but I think it's more directly Europe. The Europeans are most closely tied to these anti-corruption agencies. And by the way, these anti-corruption agencies, we're going all the way back to Zelensky's election, again, because Zelensky was elected on this pro-peace, pro-Minsk Accord platform. And then, of course, he backed away from it, and then he ended up actually, joining forces with all the anti-Russian extremists and the ultranationalists, as we well know. And it is understood, part of the reason that he backed off of backed away from that peace platform is that he was directly threatened by the ultranationalists. But what's forgotten is actually that the Western liberals, within Ukraine, and their main locus of power are these anti-corruption agencies. They too pressured him to back away from the Minsk Accords. It was actually NABU and SAPO, these very two same agencies, that said these are red lines. We don't want you making peace with Russia. Basically, is what it came down to. So he was pressured from them and by the ultranationalists, and I think he just understood that what. You could say on what side his bread was buttered, where they, he didn't really have any firm foundation to stand on. He knew who was running the show, and so he ended up becoming an enemy of the Minsk Accords. And we have the Zelensky that we have right now. But yeah, those agencies have always been players, and they're understood within Ukraine to be kind of instruments of Western influence, especially European.
I saw on X, and maybe you can confirm this, that was it the defense secretary of Ukraine, Romanov or something, that he was embroiled in this and he fled?
Yeah, I don't know if he fled or not, but yeah, he has been accused. And also the Minister of Justice. So we're talking about some very, very high-ranking people.
Right, so
Again, this mainly had to do with the energy system. In fact, it was Energoatom, which is the agency that runs the nuclear power plants, which are still, like the only reason that the lights are still on to some extent within Ukraine is that those nuclear power plants are still running because the Russians haven't attacked them, for obvious reasons. So, it's very, very important. And, but they had this kickback scheme where, contractors would kick back like 10, 15% of everything, all the work that they did for these energy agencies and these power plants, and Mindich and the others made off, like bandits. And Yeah, and it apparently extends to other people like the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Defense. So, yeah, it is major. It's going to have real consequences. Again, people are, I think within Ukraine anyway, are betting that Zelensky will stay. And you don't really see an alternative to him. And I think so the thinking is that he'll survive it, but if this whole, if this coalition against him succeed, they'll weaken him. He's been increasingly, concentrating power in his hands, and it's become sort of like unresponsive to other pressures. Like, the Europeans, maybe would like, well, I'm sure they want the corruption to be reduced. That's part of it. But, in general, they would like him to be more responsive and to their, whatever they are. I don't know always what the Europeans are asking of him, but they've found him to be increasingly, unwilling to listen to them and to pursue his, maybe in the case of Pokrovsk, because we've seen that. They've been telling, hey, you need to get out of there. This is not working. This is hurting you. This is going to, you're going to weaken your army. Same thing in Kupiansk. And he's not listening. And they would like him to listen, like in these cases, for example, and to actually respond and to follow their directives.
Well, if the Defense Secretary Romanov, if he has fled the country, or at least is embroiled in this corruption scandal and in big trouble,
Yeah.
but let's say he's left, that's the equivalent of like Pete Hegseth running off to Mexico with $100 million while you're in the middle of a war that you're supposed to be in charge of.
No,
Doesn't that have a significant impact on the battlefield, right?
Right. Well, it should. Well, one thing is like the corruption has always been there in Ukraine, and it's always been extreme. And the Ukrainians know that, so they may not be as shocked as we are when we see these things. It's kind of expected. And that's part of the thing. It's like whenever there's a scandal and a finger's pointed at somebody and an investigation launched against somebody, you have to wonder, well, wait a second, everybody, is actually corrupt in one way or another. So why did we go after this person rather than that person? Because you could launch an investigation against anybody in the government and you'd find something rather horrifying. But they have gone after these people. That's, again, the very cynical way of looking at it. And it may be that it's a little bit too cynical. But
no, I think that's right. I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
So then why go after these people? Why go after the defense secretary in the middle of a war?
Right. Well, I think, again, they want to reassert control, and they feel like, again, this is something that we've seen Zelensky doing over the last several months and even years. He has been, he's been going after all kinds of opponents, people that just don't follow his orders. The best example is Zaluzhny, getting back to what's happening actually on the front. Zaluzhny actually, in the end, he followed his orders, but he clearly was reluctant and actually expressed doubts about the strategy that they were pursuing. He was, in general, and I'm not saying he was a brilliant government or that he was deeply concerned about his men, but he was maybe a little bit more concerned about his men and more realistic than Syrsky, who was his replacement. Why is Syrsky there? Because he is simply a yes man to Zelensky. And that's, and Syrsky he's coming under a lot of criticism because people are very, very upset about what's happening in places like Pokrovsk. But yeah, why is he there? Because again, he does what Zelensky wants him to do. And that's what Zelensky has been doing all around. He's been replacing people that are, they're part of the whole Maidan revolution, supposed to be the same ideology, same party. There's only one party, in Ukraine, but they're not sufficiently loyal. They're not, they don't just, salute and obey every time Zelensky tells them to do something. They actually do express doubts and maybe leak their doubts, and that's something that makes Zelensky angry. So he gets rid of them. And I think, again, it's not just people in Ukraine, but the Europeans and others, Americans too, are actually kind of disturbed about this because they see him making some very bad decisions, especially with respect to what's going on at the front. And they would like to get him in line. I think maybe like he's symbolically just too important. They don't really have a replacement at this point. because, but maybe, if they do weaken him sufficiently, somewhere down the road, they may find a replacement for him. Somebody who is going to be more responsive, again, to maybe you can say the more realistic people, like in the military and to the Europeans that share their views.
Okay, well, we're seeing disasters on the front lines for the Ukrainians. We're seeing political unrest and scapegoating, blame games, going after people within the government. Is there an acknowledgement now amongst the West that Ukraine is lost?
Not that it is lost. No, I don't think there's an acknowledgement. There is an acknowledgement that there is at least in some quarters, that it's going badly, that it's going very badly. And that Pokrovsk is going to be lost, and that is, again, again, if you search a bit, if you read some of these articles to the end, you'll see an awareness that that the trend is pretty grim for Ukraine, but the narrative hasn't fundamentally changed. It should, but there's still this happy talk and this certainty that we just, as long as it takes, and we just got to stick with them, and the Russians are suffering horrific losses. None of that talk remains. And so I think, like, the average person, the average consumer of news, who is just goes to mainstream sources, would think, okay, it looks like they're going to lose this battle and they made a mistake here, but even so, like, the Russians, they've been trying to take the city for a year and a half, and they've, 100,000 other guys have been killed, and the Russians are really on the verge of collapse. You still have that. That's not gone, and I think that's essentially the narrative. And I don't think that narrative is going to change until there is a true collapse on a good part of the Ukrainian lines. Now, we are seeing something like a collapse down in, the Zaporozhye region right now, but that's not receiving much attention.
You think that it would start to break through in Western media more, because there have been some incidents. I don't know if you heard about Angelina Jolie. She's been a supporter of Ukraine.
Right.
She went there, and her bodyguard was forced conscripted, was just taken. Right. And she had to pay what, like $10,000 or $100,000 or something to get her own bodyguard out. And then I read in an article by somebody that was it The Guardian or The Sun?
I think The Sun. Yeah,
The Sun. I think I shared it with you. Yeah, and I thought it was very interesting because his interpreter was just nabbed, pulled out of the car and taken, and he wasn't able to get him back, and he just had to say, I'm sorry. You try to find him, talk to him, said he's off to the front now. Bang, bang, bang. That's what he told him. And it's like, you are here advocating for this war, and you see what's happening to these people.
Right.
Men, friends of yours, people that aren't supposed to be, that shouldn't be taken into the front. That just is proof of how desperate the situation is. Yeah. And yet you're still advocating the war, because in that Sun article, he was just saying, like, oh, it's just so horrible, but that just means we need to help. And here, if you're a foreigner, sign up and enlist and fight. Like, what? That's what you drew from this? That, hey, maybe that we need to end this war, that maybe these people don't want to fight, and that's why they're pulling your interpreter, your bodyguard off of the street and sending them to die into this meat grinder. Does that not penetrate their thick skulls?
Yeah, you'd think it would, and you would hope that some of the readers would stop and say, wait a second here. They may have heard some rumors about this, but they're always assured, that was just Russian misinformation or disinformation. Yeah. But yeah, it's for real. I mean, that's and these two incidents really have brought that fact to light.
Right. And you just think that these people, that they figured that they were safe because they were associated with the British press, with a Hollywood celebrity, and they're not even safe. Think about what it's like for a regular Ukrainian man that is just afraid for their life, that won't leave their basement. For some reason,
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay,
now I hear you
back.
again.
Okay,
Yeah, you're
yeah, but I'm
back.
just saying, just think about
Right,
what it would be
right.
like as a Ukrainian man, afraid for your life, living in the basement. Some of them are cross-dressing, wearing wigs, just doing whatever it is because, and we've seen so many of these videos. It's so horrible
Right, right.
of them just
Yeah,
of chasing people down, kicking them in the head while they're screaming, they're pulling, holding onto the doors, they're yanking them away.
yeah,
And then because they know what this means, they know what's
yeah,
happens. It's like, okay, we get there. We can hope if we're lucky, we're able to desert. You know, there's 21,000 deserters in October. You know, we can get away if we don't get shot by our fellow, Ukrainian commanders, or we're going to get blown up by a fab bomb or a drone. It's just,
right.
what's your life? So you got like a 50-50 chance of surviving once they pull you off there. It's
Yeah,
horrible.
yeah. No, it is. Yeah, there was actually a good article in the New York Times just a few days ago about a fishing village in southern Ukraine where there are just no men. There are actually, they'll tell you there are some men in this village, but they only come out at night, and the rest of the time, they're in basements or inside their houses with the curtains drawn. The vast majority have left. I think part of the reason is that they're close to the Romanian border, and they're fishermen. They have ways of getting across the river, so they're just gone, and there's just no men at all in this village. Again, that's just another little data point. But it's more than an anecdote. It tells you that what's happening in this country.
Yeah, it's such a nightmare. It's such a nightmare. And I can't believe that we're supporting it. And it's one of these things that if you say that that you don't believe that should keep on sending money and weapons to Ukraine, that somehow you're just a Putin supporter and you're just an evil person. It's just like,
Right.
think about what you're
right.
supporting right now. Think
Yeah.
about what's happening in that country.
Right. Well, think about, again, like where a lot of this money is going. That's one thing that this corruption scandal is going. You're sending money to these people that are forcibly conscripting, poor men, men without connections. The ones, it's well-known fact that if you got a lot of money, you can pay you can pay a bribe and you're fine. And, okay, they won't touch you. But the vast majority, working class guys, fishermen or whatever, they don't have that money. They don't have those connections. They're the ones that are grabbed. And you have this very corrupt elite, at the top overseeing this system. One fact that came to light as a result of this recent scandal is that in Mindage's apartment, one of his apartments, there is a picture of a golden toilet or whatever, a gold toilet. We don't know if that may or may not be true, but there was also said that they found $4 million in cash, and the cash was actually packaged in the way that the Federal Reserve packages
it. I was going to bring that up actually when you were talking about this, because I remember seeing it, and if you see the stack of money, it says Federal Reserve Atlanta. I'm like, that's next to me, 3 hours away, Atlanta. Why is that money here?
I don't understand. I would think that they would transfer it electronically or something. Maybe they actually do send them the cash. I don't know. But anyway.
Probably both.
Probably both. So anyway, you're talking about as long as it takes and sending them in, the billions of dollars. Look, that's where clearly a significant fraction of that money just goes to gold toilets and things.
It's so frustrating. This is why so many Americans are upset because, there's natural disasters several that happened here the past year or two, not far here, just in Appalachia, the flooding, all these homes destroyed, no help. My wife, one of her friends from college, she lost her house, her family, her house and cars in the Hawaii fires. Just everything completely wiped out, demolished. They gave $750 per family. No, this is what pisses people off so much. We're so in debt, and we have these crises here everywhere. Every American city is struggling, and there's just all this money that our politicians don't give a damn about what's happening here.
Right.
It's all about, we got to focus on Israel. We got to focus on Ukraine. We got to focus on Venezuela. Like, why? And at the end of the day, what it's all about is U.S. hegemony. That's what everything is about. And I think many people, before we started these conversations, Dad, I didn't even really understand the concept of multipolarity. It was a new concept and idea to me. And even U.S. hegemony, I just kind of just knew U.S. was number one. I didn't understand the empire. But, the rise of the multipolar world is a good thing. And I think the problem is the average American just feels like it's patriotic to say, like, I support my military and I support this. They don't understand that this is a battle between multipolarity and U.S. hegemony. And I don't know, maybe it's too much to get in this, but I don't want to say like we should be rooting for necessarily countries like Russia and China. I want to root for America, but I'm rooting for them in the sense that Russia and China are ushering in multipolarity is what it is. So it's just kind of, I think it's a tough thing for sometimes people to frame it in their mind, to try to think that I'm not a traitor. I'm not unpatriotic. No. I hate what our country is doing because it's destroying my country and destroying lives all around the world.
Right.
It's not good for us. And I think we got to work on that messaging. How do we explain that to people?
I think it's easy. That's actually an easy message to make. I think it's first of all, it's very firmly grounded in reality. It's just that, for whatever you want to say about Trump, and he just deserves all kinds of really excoriating criticism. There's no question about it. But the America First idea, didn't start with him, but it is actually a very powerful idea and can be used, and I think it resonates with people. It's a simple message that actually does make sense. It's not America First in the sense that, we need to go out and bomb other countries. It's America First. It says it's the needs of our citizens should come first. The duty of the government is to address those needs and to keep us out of wars, because again, it's the citizens that suffer. They're the ones that get sent abroad and get killed. I think people like Tucker Carlson have done an excellent job of making that case, and it clearly does resonate. Again, Trump has been this is to actually be very, very kind. He's been a very imperfect, leader of that movement. I think more than imperfect. He's really betrayed it. But somebody else may pick up the mantle and carry it forward.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. When we try to explain multipolarity, maybe don't even talk about it. Just it's easier to resonate with people. It's just that it's America First. That's an easy message to understand. And America First is a multipolar position.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's like, again, it's what Pat Buchanan said, a republic, not an empire. It's time to become a republic again, which is, in other words, go back to the original understanding is that we don't go, out in search of monsters to destroy. We should lead by example. If we're doing something right, the best thing to do is to work on doing that right, and other countries will see us and imitate us, but rather than trying to impose it on other countries.
Yeah, it's tough in the United States because the U.S. military is almost like a deity in this country. This idea of supporting our troops, supporting our military. If you don't do that, then somehow you're a traitor. And I think they use that, and it's very effective on many people that are, at their heart, true patriots. And I think the America First message does resonate with a lot of them, but they have difficulty, some cognitive dissonance when it comes to the military. It's like, well, we got to support our boys. We got to back them. And so no matter what happens, he's just like, yes, we support the troops. So how do you handle that? Because I have neighbors that are ex-Army and Navy, and they're nice people, but when it comes to this type of stuff, I feel uncomfortable almost because it's like, I don't support this.
Yeah, it's hard for somebody like me, or to a lesser extent you, but because my background is Berkeley, California, and the anti-war movement. That's kind of what I grew up with, and I don't think I do a very good job of talking to those people. But there are a lot of veterans, as I mentioned, that actually have become very, very effective, anti-war advocates and advocates of multipolarity and of a correct understanding of America First. And of course, we know some of them out there, like Daniel Davis, we know them. I think those people are very effective because you see right away, you look at him, he's in uniform, you see his office. This guy he actually was a tank commander and whatever. Right. And I think those people can make the case very effectively. It's kind of, it's easy to write off somebody like me, they just don't want to listen to it. But, what you can say, it's like, I support the troops, but we have to make sure, their lives are on the line. So we have to make sure that they're actually in a just and necessary cause. Is this really what America needs? And it has to be America first. It can't be Israel first. Those are two different things. I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but I think maybe they're starting to hear that.
Yeah, I'm kind of coming to the conclusion, though, if we want to support our military for a just and necessary cause, I can't think of any war that the U.S. has fought that I would say was absolutely just and necessary.
Right.
That was really vital to the interest of the people living here in this country. Can you
Right.
think of anything, any war?
Yeah, no, it's hard, because actually, again, we haven't had to worry about invasions,
Yeah.
from Canada or Mexico. It's just, even if you go to World War II, again, I know you can make a good argument. That's, where at least one place where people can make a good argument that was a just and necessary war. But even there, it's not actually clear that we had to become involved. And there's some question about whether or not we may have laid a trap for the Japanese. That's a big, messy question. But, there at least I'll say, yeah, okay, you can make an argument. And I'll just accept it, just simplify things. But since then, I don't think we can. It's Korea. Well, I guess that proved to be a disaster. We lost 50,000 soldiers there, but the Koreans lost millions. And yeah, Vietnam was a disaster. It ended. Yeah, everything since then. It's
They're
just
all disasters,
right?
And then we're just told that this was just such a great thing, and then that's why we're awesome. And it's just like that's none of it is true. And so it just, the military scares me in that sense,
Right.
because I just don't. If we can say that maybe one time it was the right thing, possibly debatable, then it's like. The structure, how we build society and with the military needs to change. There needs to be something like enshrined in our Constitution to say that only when there's an invading force, make it that there's no wiggle room, that you can't get involved in these other wars. Like, okay, well, once the Canadians get
Right.
so mad, they ran out of maple syrup, they're coming down. Okay, then that's the only time, something
right.
like this.
Right. I think the last time we did have a declaration of war was World War II. And there again, there was an attack on American soil. There's no question about it. It happened. So there is something, again, you can make a real case for war. And it was made properly constitutionally at that time. But since then, we haven't had a constitutional war, and we haven't had, you can say that we're responding to the attack on our soil in, the case of 9/11. But Iraq had nothing to do with that. Even Afghanistan, it's not, it wasn't the Afghan government that went after us. It was Al-Qaeda was there, and they actually, if I remember correctly, they did not want to be, the Taliban did not want to be attacked, and they were willing to hand them over. But we didn't, again, we just wanted to go in and take over the whole government. We had that mess that 20 years, another $1 trillion and thousands of lives lost and nothing gained. No, it's been a series of disasters. Again, there should never be wars of choice. Let's put it that way. It's just like any war has to be, in order, if you're going to fight it, it has to be an existential question about the security of your own nation. The future existence of your own nation is at stake. Otherwise, the thing is, you just can't go ask people, even if you think there's these are the good guys and those are the bad guys, and we have to be on the side of the good guys or whatever. You can't ask your own people to go out there and die for that. It just, in the end, it won't work. You can, and the other side, it will be existential because you're over there. It's their territory. And so that's what happened in Vietnam, for example. It said, okay, yeah, we did a tremendous amount of damage. And if we really had committed to it, decided it was existential, we could have won because we just have this overwhelming military might. But it wasn't existential for us. So after 55,000 or so American soldiers died, we said, let's get out of here. That's what's going to happen. And the Ho Chi Minh understood that. And that's what happens again and again. Afghanistan is another case. In the end, it's just like, this is really not our war. This was a war of choice. You shouldn't have done it. Never make a war of choice. If there's no choice, then, it's only when there's no choice, when you see okay, again, the future, if we don't do this, then our own future, is in doubt.
Well, I guess Trump feels like he has no choice because he's in the Epstein files. So I guess we got to go to
Yeah,
war.
I mean,
That's what
the
it is.
Venezuela is just some is just the most absurd kind of example of that. It's
Yeah,
obviously nobody's just completely invented, you know.
yeah, I know. I don't know how to feel. I think a lot of Americans are kind of lost with their identity and just their country and just what to do. It's just everything's just so gross now and just so broken and falling apart. And I'm really worried about the future of this country and on so many different levels. I mean, we have all these wars. I mean, just the Epstein stuff, the Israel lobby, but the cost of living here. Talking about a 50-year mortgage. The average age when somebody buys a house now is almost 40 years old now. People aren't having kids, and just something I was talking with my buddy yesterday was, we work on building websites and things, with AI, and it's just crazy how good AI is getting. And I've been messing around, obviously the thumbnail images I use AI. I know there's some people don't like the things I make on there, but I've been experimenting with like video. The amount of jobs that are going to be lost because of AI are huge. And who are going to be losing these jobs? It's really actually, it's not the blue collar jobs that are being replaced. It's all these people that are in college now or just graduated from college that took on $200,000 worth of debt. And now they have an unmarketable skill. It's completely being made redundant by AI. And so it's just, you're going to have millions of people that are just saddled with debt, that can't find a job, that can't buy a house. The cost of just food is tough enough. They're having to live with their parents. And, the jobs we did need are things that we didn't push our kids to be in. We told all of our kids, they told all of us, just go to school, take out the student loan, go into debt, and then you're going to be fine. And you're owed, you'll just be entitled to a decent paying job and you'll be fine and you can buy a house and raise a family. That's just not true. And for just this new generation, they're so screwed. And so just what's going to happen? There's going to be so many people. And then just in the backdrop, of course, it's like, oh, well, yeah, our president or our politicians are blackmailed by pedophiles. Everyone's bought off by AIPAC and Israel. We're going to go to war with Iran, where we're almost $40 trillion in debt. Interest rates are still high. It's just the whole thing is just falling apart. Just there's going to be so much rage. And so what's going to happen in 5 years, 10 years? Like, even if we avoid war with Iran, avoid World War III with Russia, get out of Venezuela without it suffering. It's like there's just this tidal wave of problems, that are just going to be hitting the United States, and just not just the United States, the whole Western world. And we're not prepared for it. And I'm really worried about what's going to happen.
Well, on that positive note, I think we should bring this to an end.
Okay. Happy Friday. Happy Friday.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
No. I don't disagree with you, and I'll say just very briefly that I was a translator, a freelance Chinese to English translator for roughly 35 years, and I saw AI. With the rise of AI, I saw the writing was on the wall. I think there would still be a role for me, but it would be greatly reduced. And I chose to retire because of that. Well, and I would say, okay, fortunately, I had my 35 years. But yeah, I wouldn't advise anybody to go into translation now.
Right. No, it's hard to know what to do. Well, you're not retired now. Now you're a geopolitical analyst. So
okay.
Congrats on your new career, Dad.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. We'll end it there, Dad.
All right.
Okay. Thanks a bunch. Have a good rest of your day and a great weekend. Bye-bye.